Hello, my name is Dr. Ian Boardley from the University of Birmingham, and I'm going to be presenting today the development of a 10-year research embedded strategic plan for anti-doping education using the Delphi method. Now, the background to this project was that we'd established through some of the earlier work packages gaps in the literature, areas that needed development, and what we wanted to do through this work package was to strategically identify what some of the key areas of research were that were needed. But we didn't want to do that just from our own perspective. We wanted that to be informed by some of the earlier reviews that we'd conducted. But we wanted to really get the feel from the community, the clean sport community, in terms of researchers, and people working in clean sport and anti-doping governance, to get their feeling for what was most needed in terms of research. So we used something called the Delphi procedure, which is a procedure where often where you've got these research questions that are difficult to answer objectively using normal methods, you can use the Delphi procedure to gather information from experts. So you provide what the evidence base is to the experts, and then based on their responses you can get a best estimate. You can establish consensus on something that's quite difficult to establish, and here obviously there might be different opinions from different people in terms of what are the key areas of research, but if you can bring together a representative group of experts from the area, then and establish consensus within that group, then you can develop what should be a very useful strategic plan, and captures most of the main areas of research that are needed in an area, and that's what we sought to do in the area of anti-doping and clean sport. And through that, once we'd established that consensus, we wanted to develop something called the Clean Sport Plan 2030, which was this 10-year strategic plan that will be based around the research that's needed to support doping prevention, and that would allow us to sort of inform and guide research efforts, and also inform the research agendas of major funding agencies such as WADA and hopefully others such as the EU and PCC. Okay, so in terms of the methods in preparation, as I just alluded to earlier, we wanted to be informed by some of the earlier work that we've done in the RESPECT project. So as you have seen in other videos, hopefully, we conducted a large-scale quantitative review, and that was the video that we presented last week. But we also conducted a large-scale qualitative review, a review of qualitative research, and we also conducted the international focus groups with athletes around the concept of clean sport. So based around the evidence from those earlier studies, so identifying what the gaps in the literature were, but also what areas athletes were identifying were important for research, we developed an initial questionnaire that could incorporate all of those different elements, those gaps in the literature and areas for research needed. And the idea of this questionnaire pack was then the expert groups that we would bring together, or the expert group would rank and comment on these potential areas for research, and also identify research questions within those different areas that could help us to then over time develop the research agenda based on their responses and their rankings. So what we looked to do was also recruit from two main groups. We did include some athletes within here, because obviously there's athletes that have this level of expertise, but the main two categories we were looking at were academic researchers and practitioners and people working within governance of anti-doping and clean sport. So in the academic group, experts had to have at least 5 years of experience researching in the area of image and performance enhancing drugs, and also being the first or lead author on at least one peer-reviewed publication, but for the majority of our experts considerably more than that. And then in terms of practitioners, so equivalent sort of criteria, but within the area of anti-doping governance, at least 5 years experience working in the education teams and governance around anti-doping, but also being involved in the development an implementation of at least one education program, and similar with the academics, for the majority of the experts, it was much more than one education program. In terms of data collection, we used an online survey method. As you're going to see, we recruited people from around the world, so we needed to be able to contact people remotely. So we developed an online survey, and the Delphi project process uses a iterative process where you have a number of surveys, and it's usually around about 3, which is the number that we ended up using, and the questionnaire, the survey that you use develops over time depending on the responses. But what you do at each subsequent time point, so at time 2 and time 3 in our study, you feed back some of the data and the information that's collected at the first time point, and then that informs people's responses. So you go from a very broad idea and topic area, and then start to narrow down to the specific research question, so you can establish that consensus around the research question you're interested in. So here, in terms of what are the priority areas of research, and also the questions that need to be answered under those areas. And you end the Delphi poll once you've established consensus. So usually in your final round of questioning, one of the things you're looking to do is to establish that you've got consensus across the group, which we did. Okay, so just a little bit of information around the expert characteristics. Obviously we collected this data at each round, but what I'm presenting here are the characteristics at the third round. So these were people that responded across all three times. You see that overall there's a tendency towards more male participants. This was the difference between males and females was not as stark in round 1 and round 2. Unfortunately, as we lost people were not able to participate at the later rounds. It tended to be more females, so that disparity between males and females was a little bit more exaggerated at the round 3. But still good representation from female participants as well. In terms of age distribution, you can see that it's quite evenly spread across the 3 older age categories, but not so many in the younger group. As I mentioned, we did have some athletes in the sample, and I think they were the ones that were represented at the lower age range. But if you think that one of our criteria for inclusion for both academics and practitioners was that they had at least 5 years of experience, so it makes sense that most people are going to be in sort of at least the sort of middle age category and above, as we've seen here. And then in terms of the roles that they adopted, so the practitioners were spread evenly across national anti-doping organisations and sports federations, so people acting in roles within sports federations that are specific to clean sport and anti-doping, and then people working within national anti-doping organisations, primarily in the education teams, and then academics that have been working in this field as well. And majority was spread evenly across those 3 categories, and then we've got that smaller percentage from the athletes, and these are athletes who are also engaging in academic research as well, and gaining the experience to meet the criteria from that experience that they've had. In terms of which continent they represent, so you can see that we've got representation from 6 of the 7 continents, but obviously that's not, as you can see from the chart, it's not evenly spread. So it was Europe centric, probably partly because that's where a lot of the respect group are sourced, are based, and that's where the contact bases are, but also it's where there's a lot of national anti-doping organisations, and a lot of research is conducted in Europe as well, so that would explain that. And also there's a wealth of sort of academic research conducted in this area in Australasia as well, and you can see that represented. But we have got representation across the other continents as well. But unfortunately it's not as high as for the other continents, and there was more drop off in these other continents as we got to round 3 from round 1, so we did have broader representation at the earlier time points. In terms of data that we collected at round 1, so based on those earlier reviews and the athlete interviews, we developed 15 research topics that we asked the expert group to rate for importance at round one. So in round one we had 57 experts, so there's 57 in the expert group at that first time point. And these scores down the right hand side, you can see that how people have rated them for importance, with higher scores representing topic areas that were seen as being more important. So what we're doing here is to look to try and only include or exclude at this point. So only include the more important topics and exclude the ones that are seen as being less important. So the ones that you see here towards the top of this table are the ones that were excluded and then not taken forward into round two. And what we also did within round one was asked the expert group to propose research questions within each of these research topic areas, and then for the ones that were retained based on these scores in terms of their importance, we then took forward those research questions, or we developed them and looked to see where there was commonality across different experts in terms of the questions they were proposing, and then developed a set of questions for each of the topic areas that were retained, and that's what we took forward into round two. And what we actually asked people to do then now was not instead of just rating importance, what we actually asked people to do at this stage was to rank order them. So instead of saying how important each topic was individually, it was to compare and contrast the remaining 8. So based on those ratings of importance in round one, we asked the expert group to rank the top 8 of those. So we retained 8 of those topic areas, and then those were ranked. So if someone scored something a 1, it was seen as being the most important. Someone seen as scored an 8, then it was the least important. So you can see that, you know, this top area here, this topic area, effectiveness of anti-doping interventions, education programs, including development, implementation, and long-term implementation. That was what was seen as being quite clearly ranked as being the most important compared to the other ones, because there's quite a leap in terms of the average ranking for that area than for the next 2, and you can see those 2 are quite markedly different to the remaining 5 as well. So it's quite clear that those top 3 are being ranked as being the most important compared to the others by the majority of people. And what we did then when we developed the actual research agenda was included more questions for the topic areas that were being rated as being most important. So for that top one there, for the effectiveness of intervention and education programs, we allocated 4 research questions, and then as we drop down we allocate 3 all the way down to that bottom one there where you see the anti-doping system and athletes' experience of key procedures was just allocated 1 question. So it was all 8 of these topic areas were included in the research agenda, but more research questions were included for the ones that were ranked as being most important. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a similar process in terms of ranking, but this time for the research questions. So these were the research questions that were developed based on the suggestions from the experts in round one. So I'm just giving you one example of it here, which was for that the one that was ranked most important, the topic area, that effectiveness of interventions and education programs topic area. We had these 8 questions that were based around what had been suggested in round one by the experts, and the ones that are in italics, the top 4, are the ones that were ranked as being most important compared to the other ones, and then they were the ones that were retained and went into the final research agenda. And we followed that similar process across all the 8 topic areas. What differed slightly was the number of questions. So the number of questions in each area differed depending on how many different questions were suggested by the experts in round one. And as you can see from this one, it's quite clear that those top 4, there's a separation between those 4 and the remaining ones, and they're the ones that went into the final research agenda. Okay, so what we did at the end of round 2, because we had these 8 topic areas that people were ranking as being important. We allocated questions accordingly depending on those ratings of the rankings of importance. But then what we did in round 3 was actually present that draft research agenda to the experts. And if we hadn't got acceptance and consensus on its acceptance at this point, we would have refined it further and continued the process. But as you can see here, almost all of the expert group at this point either accepted it fully or accepted it mostly at this point. So mostly was just sort of minor adjustments, and then there was the opportunity for qualitative comments for what those minor adjustments would be. And there was only one person that did not accept it, and one person that accepted it partly. So we were happy at this point that we had consensus around this draft research agenda that we developed, and that became the final research agenda. What we also did at this stage in round 3 was asked about ratings of feasibility of delivery, and we did this in 2 ways. We did it for 100% delivery, so delivering every research question within every topic area over the next 10 years, but we also asked them for half, so 50% of delivery of those research questions across the 8 topic areas. And what you can see is that there's quite a spread of opinion in terms of delivery of 100%, and that's a lot of research questions to answer fully in 10 years. But there's still, a significant proportion of our expert group thought that that was possible if we supported the delivery of the research agenda appropriately. And then there's 20 out of the 25 for 50%. So there's a lot of confidence in the group that the majority of this research agenda could be delivered in the 10 years. What we also did at round 3 was asked for qualitative comments around what some of the main barriers and facilitators of delivery of the research agenda would be, and this was information that we utilised in the actual Clean Sport plan that we developed out of the research agenda. And this is how it appears. So on the first page, so what you've got on the left is the actual research agenda. So that's the 8 topic areas that are in green. And I recognise that this you can't read this from the PowerPoint, but if you go to the Clean Sport Alliance website, the Knowledge Exchange platform, you'll be able to download this as a PDF. So what we've got on the left hand side are those 8 topic areas, and then the research questions under them, and you can see, as I mentioned earlier, the number of research questions allocated to each reduces as you move down. So the priority areas are the ones up at the top, and then as we move down we've got the areas of lower priority. And then on the right hand side we've got that sort of plan of delivery and how to best deliver the research agenda on the second page. So we identified key barriers based on the comments from the experts, key facilitators, but then other key objectives for implementation in that third section, and these are sort of guidelines for ourselves in terms of trying to deliver this, but also for for organisations that are involved in Clean Sport and anti-doping in terms of their assistance and taking on board the Clean Sport plan and helping deliver it over the next 10 years. So we were very pleased with the way this Delphi project ran. We got good representation from experts across the globe, and really high level in terms of their expertise. Really good levels of engagement from those who participated in the Delphi project, and that allowed us to develop what we think is a very comprehensive research agenda for research in this area in the next 10 years. But also lots of engagement in terms of identifying what those key facilitators and barriers to delivery are, because as well as developing the plan itself, what's equally as important is making sure we do everything we can to try and deliver it, and that's what we're looking to do now. And what's really been pleasing to see is that we're already seeing adoption and taking on board some of what's been included in the research agenda. So WADA's social science research strategy that's recently been released has been informed by the research agenda, and also the WADA social science research team are already starting to address some of those barriers and facilitators. So the more that we can try and encourage other organisations to do similar, the better chance of the delivery of this research agenda over the next 10 years. So many thanks for listening. If you're more interested, you're really interested in hearing more about this research agenda and its development, have any questions or answers, please join us on the 8th and 9th of December at our Clean Sport Forum. There'll be an opportunity for a question and answer session in there where you'll be able to put your questions to myself and others, and we'll be able to answer those then. And also please visit cleansportalliance.org and have a look around the webpage there as well, and as I say, you can download the actual research agenda there. So many thanks, and hope you enjoyed the talk.